And we continue at 2:06 in the afternoon. Talk Radio 790 KABC, the John Phillips Show. Mr. Randy Wangs in Culver City.
Roger writes in at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. Guys, the ICE protesters are back out today. Today they're blocking access to Union Station. So much for getting people out of their cars and onto trains and buses.
Uh-oh. You probably don't want to ride those trains anyway.
You may want to consider not using the metro.
In a weird sort of way, they're probably doing us a favor today. There won't be as many stories on the news about people getting stabbed on the trains or the buses if people just decide to take their car. 800-222-5222 is the telephone number, 1-800-222-5222. It is our pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. She is the Los Angeles County Supervisor representing the 5th District. That includes Pasadena, Santa Clarita, the Antelope Valley, and beyond. You can follow her on X at Kathryn Barger. Supervisor Kathryn Barger, welcome.
And I proudly represent Altadena.
That is very true, and it's been a very, very busy time for you as you've been taking part in the rebuilding process and trying to survey the damage that has been done because of that fire. We just recently took a call last hour from a homeowner, happened to be from the Pacific Palisades, who was expressing great frustration with the process, essentially saying that you have to show proof of residency to be allowed in. You're only allowed to be there for certain periods of time. There are rules that are associated with virtually everything that you do. But he said the homeless encampments were allowed to pop right back up on PCH again. They obviously have no proof of residency. They're there past the curfew time limits that he has to abide by. And he said the local residents are just going nuts because the rules are being enforced for them, but not for the homeless and others. Your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, I actually listened to him, and I heard the frustration in his voice. And, you know, as someone who represents Altadena, where we actually have lifted restrictions, and so the curfew is not in effect, we are very cognizant of the fact that the homeowners need to be able to get back onto their property to do any sifting, to try to find any anything that's left from the fire. You know, in the city of LA, and I actually did reach out, and I'm going to find out because I'm curious as well, because if there's limitation on getting back into the area, if they're letting RVs park there, then it doesn't sound right. So I'm going to look into it. I really don't have an answer for you, though, John.
When you look at this rebuilding process that people are right now trying to survey how long it's going to be, because you have a million different questions you have to ask yourself when you're trying to figure out what the next step is. Do you rent an Airbnb? Do you sign a lease on a new house? Do you stay in a hotel? Do you stay with relatives? Do you put your kids in a different school in a different county? Whatever the case may be. And people just want an accurate timeline in terms of realistically, when are they going to be back? When does life go back to normal? And it seems like it's a hard number to give them, that the number constantly changes depending on who you talk to. Governor Newsom says that he's going to try to streamline the process so that the Coastal Commission doesn't bother people and CEQA doesn't bother people, and everyone is just on the same page that we want to get these people and make them whole as fast as possible. Do you think that's going to happen in a timely manner, or do you think that we're still looking at a very long time?
So first I'll say that even during the time when we weren't allowing people back in, they wanted to know when they're going to be allowed back in. And each day we would say it's not going to be today. And I said to the fire chief and all, just if it's going to be next Thursday, tell them once next Thursday so that they can be disappointed, but at least they have a timeline. Having said that, you know, the 18 months that's been thrown out there was thrown out there by the Army Corps of Engineer. And when the president came out here, he made it very clear to all in the room that 18 months is unacceptable. So they being the federal government under President Trump, have provided additional resources. Ambassador Rick Grinnell has been the point person on that out here. And my goal and what I'm doing right now is getting as many homeowners to opt in, which means to have the option of the county going on their property and cleaning out the debris. The more people we can get to sign up, the quicker we can begin to do the debris removal. And then last week, I'm not waiting. Last week, a motion was passed that I brought in, 19 pages, longest motion I've ever brought in, even when I worked for Antonovich. And it basically streamlines the process. And it says that, all the do-good stuff that we wanted to put into building is not necessary. We're going to make it as easy as possible, and there's going to be more to come. I mean, we've got to get rid of the red tape, and there is so much. But I've made this commitment to my constituents up in Altadena that I'm in this for the long haul, and I'm going to make sure it happens, including allowing ADUs. Right now, an ADU cannot be built on property unless there's a home. Well, if your home burned down, you obviously can't put an ADU. Many people are going to want to live on their property while the rebuild effort's going on. And it's a win-win because then they've got an ADU on their property. They can live there while they rebuild. And then once they rebuild, they have an ADU that they can rent out. I mean, it's a win-win. So these are things, John, that I'm not waiting. I'm moving forward with very quickly because I'm anxious to get people back up into a place where they don't want to sell, but they want to rebuild Altadena, which right now a vast majority of the residents want to rebuild.
That's surprising to hear because we've talked to some listeners, primarily again in Pacific Palisades, who essentially have said the same thing, which is, look, if I were younger, I would want to rebuild. It would be something that I would be interested in doing, but I'm in my 60s or I'm retired or I'm just not a place in my life where a 3 to 5 year process, which is what some of them have been quoted, is just something I'm willing to do. In Altadena, you're hearing the opposite, that most people want to go back to their old neighborhood?
Well, I mean, I will say, someone told me there was a 90-year-old woman who was offered $700,000 for her property, and she said at 90, I could take that $700,000, move to Mississippi, and live out the rest of my life. The concern I have with that, and by the way, it's a free country, and it's each person is to do it as their property. But we're going to look at things like land banks because my greatest concern is because the state has passed legislation that allows them to circumvent local control and have what they call by right, where you can build higher than normal and no setback and no parking. My concern is that with those laws on the books, you're going to have people coming in, developers coming in, and changing the entire fabric of Altadena. And so we're looking even at possibly establishing a land bank, and we're doing that in real time for those that choose not to rebuild just for that reason that you just said.
When you help your constituents go through the process of rebuilding, and I'm sure you're going to hit some bureaucratic roadblocks along the way, maybe even a lot of them. Do you think that there are things, even though this was a horrific tragedy, this was obviously an awful event, that we can learn from this where we can say, okay, these regulations are totally unnecessary. They're unnecessary for these fire victims, but they're unnecessary for everyone else too. They got to go.
Well, yes and no. I mean, it's clear to me. I've got a project up in Santa Clarita that's in a high fire zone, and they're building what they call hardened homes, which means that they are prepared for wildfires. I think there are things that we can and should do to help homeowners do that when they rebuild, but that comes at a cost. So what I've said to the governor, and I'm saying it to the listeners, I think it's important for the individuals that are putting together these incredibly generous amounts of money to help homeowners, that it not be a loan, but a grant that's provided to individuals so that they can, in fact, build to the specifications of what's going to be safe in a high fire zone, which is a win-win because then insurance is more likely to be offered knowing that these individuals have homes that meet the standards based on high fire.
The big debate right now, or one of the big debates about how to proceed with rebuilding after these fires is whether or not federal dollars should have strings attached. I'm not aware of virtually any scenario where the federal government has given large sums of money to the states without having strings attached, or for that matter, the state giving money to local government without strings attached. There's always strings attached. And when you're looking at a situation like this, I think the concern that a lot of people have is to make sure, as you just described, that the money actually goes to the people who were the victims, the people who were directly impacted by this, and it doesn't get gobbled up by someone else, as we saw happen with EDD at the state level during COVID-19, when the state of California was taken for something north of $30 billion by, in many cases, out-of-state criminals. The strings, to my estimation, could be used in part to, A, make sure this doesn't happen again, but also to make sure that the money goes to the right place and doesn't get taken by someone else.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, my dad would tell me there are no free lunches, and I've been with the county since 1989, and you are absolutely right. Whether it be at the state level or the federal level, there are always what they're calling strings attached. I think where it's different now is there are those concerned that the strings are not going to meet the political ideology of maybe what is currently in play. But, you know, at the end of the day, this is nothing new in terms of provision or, you know, a grant or even relief funds being provided with the understanding that you have to do something in return. And that's something, I mean, it has to be, I would think, reasonable, but at the same time, for everyone to say there should be no strings attached, as a taxpayer, that's just not going to happen. I wouldn't want it to happen. You know, I'm also a taxpayer. I'm a county supervisor, but I also pay my taxes. And I think everyone wants to make sure that when you are filling out your tax returns and giving all that money to both the state and local or federal governments, that they're being accountable with the dollars that you're sending in. And that's exactly what this is. Now, I don't know what those strings are going to be, John. That's to be determined. But at the end of the day, I find it almost distracting to have to kind of throw that up as a fear to many people. Our job is to negotiate with the state and negotiate with the federal government to make sure that we do everything we can to bring the aid and resources to our constituency. And I'm not going to play fearmonger with my constituents by saying, oh, my God, there's going to be strings attached. Let us find out what they are, and then let's discuss it. I mean, the president was very clear that he is going to be here to help the victims of these fires. He made it very clear. He said it on the air. He said it outside of the microphone. And I'm taking him at his word. But at the same time, I know there's going to be asks provided. But as you said, it happens both at the state and at the federal level long before this president was in office.
Not long after the fire started, we received reports that there was looting going on at some of the homes that were impacted by the fires. Arrests were made. We no longer have George Gascon as the district attorney. We have Nathan Hochman, who has been very vocal about being very willing to throw the book at people who participate in that kind of criminality. But it's not just the looting that fire victims have to worry about. They have to worry about fraudulent contractors. They have to worry about people trying to take advantage of them in any number of illegal ways. To your eye, is law enforcement on top of that right now? Are these fire victims who have already been traumatized, are they being preyed upon in any significant numbers by these criminals in this sort of way?
You know, there are, I call them pigs, but that's insulting a pig, out there that are going to take advantage of victims. There's no question about it. But I had Hochman at a few of the press conferences we had, and if I had a dollar for how many times he said, and you will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, and he means it. He means it. So to anyone out there that thinks they're going to get away with it, this is a DA who actually recognizes that victims, in fact, are victims, and that crimes like this need to be prosecuted, and they need to pay the ultimate price. And in one case, he was talking about a third strike for two individuals that were burglarizing up in the Palisades, and they're looking at life as a result. And he's not messing around. I'm going to have a workshop for a couple of them. I think one's not going to be sufficient to let people know what to be careful of when it comes to people that are going to knock on your door and say, I can build your house for $200 a square foot. If it's too good to be true, it's too good. So I really want to educate people about what they need to look for when they are hiring anybody to do any work on their property, because there are people that are going to take advantage of the situation and then disappear. And my biggest fear is going to be on the most vulnerable, and that's usually in Altadena, quite frankly.
Last night, there was a forum that was hosted by Barbara Ferrer of the L.A. County Department of Public Health. Lindsay Horvath was there. They were fielding questions from people, primarily from the Pacific Palisades area. There's a lot of uncertainty, as we discussed earlier in the conversation. A lot of people have questions. The LA County Department of Public Health has disabled the ability for fire victims and everyone else to comment and ask questions on their various social media platforms, whether it is Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever the case may be. Should they allow people to make comments and ask questions in a public forum?
The short answer is yes. I know that during COVID that was an issue. I'm doing a forum at 4 o'clock, and we encourage people to send us questions and even in the chat put up questions. You know, let me tell you, if I believed every single thing written about me on Facebook, I'd be very depressed. You know, our job, well, go easy on me, John, but our job is...
Well, hey, I'm in the same boat as you in that one.
Yeah. But our job is to answer the questions of people. I mean, obviously there's going to be people that are going to have some pretty snide stuff. Just ignore it. Move on. I mean, there are people that are going to benefit from questions that are asked from someone else that maybe they didn't think of. So I take all questions within reason, and I say within reason when it's not unkind or disparaging about my weight or my looks. I'm okay.
LA County Supervisor Kathryn Barger, thank you so much for stopping by. You can follow Supervisor Barger on X at Kathryn Barger, the lone voice in many cases of sanity on that board of supervisors. Supervisor Barger, thanks so much for stopping by.
Thank you.
If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, if you want to go back and listen to a portion of the show that you may have missed while you were, at an appointment, exercising, grocery shopping, whatever the case may be, that's easy to do.
All you got to do is go to kabc.com, click on podcasts.
Quite frankly,
go to the Apple Podcast app, iHeart, Spotify, search for The John Phillips Show, hit subscribe. You can download all the episodes.
Quite frankly.
You can do a Google on the YouTube or get that handy-dandy KABC app.
Quite frankly.
Search KABC AM in the Apple App Store or the Android Store.
Quite frankly.
It's the easiest way to listen live to this radio station and download all the podcasts. This is the last time I'm telling you today.
That's your final warning.
And coming up on Friday of this week, you and I are going to the OC.
We're going to Orange County, everybody. Come see Johnny and I broadcast live from noon to 3 Friday the 7th at Rove Santa Ana. Rove Santa Ana is a full-service EV charging station with 40 ultra-fast EV chargers, a 24/7 lounge with restrooms and free Wi-Fi, a car wash, and a premium convenience store, Recharge by Gelson's. We're going to have free samples from vendors and barbecuing going on, so come hungry as we broadcast live. Rove and Recharge by Gelson's are located at 1008 East 17th Street in Santa Ana off the 5 at the corner of East 17th and Lincoln. We'll see you live Friday the 7th.
Right now it's time to open up the California Crime Blotter.
If the cashier is dummy.
Questions?
And Randy, this next edition reminds me of the phrase, house guests are like fish. After 3 days, they start to stink.
In Sacramento, a man decided to do something nice and take in a homeless man to live with him. He got stabbed.
You don't say.
For more, here's CBS Sacramento.
Now to this, a near-fatal friendship.
Now there's some alliteration for you.
You know, Randy, I thought that the problem with homelessness was the high cost of living.
Now to this, a near-fatal friendship. A Sacramento homeowner helps a homeless man who ends up attacking him.
You know why they say don't feed the bears, right?
Oh, yes.
we have Madison Keevy now in studio with us on this one because that attack could have ended a lot worse, right, Madison?
It could have. You know, we're waiting on that mugshot of...
Luckily, this guy was really bad at stabbing.
Yeah, well, especially for the homeowner.
Shot of the suspect in this story, and the victim who's in the hospital is focused on recovery, not a photo. But this story goes beyond pictures. It's about neighbor helping neighbor, looking out for the person who lives next door.
We have, longtime residents in this neighborhood, so we have text groups, so we keep a good eye on everything.
Boulevard.
I think we're meeting the busybody.
If my neighbor took in a homeless person and then the homeless person turned on him, I'm not so sure I would be willing to step in.
You've had some bad neighbors.
Not the old ones. The old ones were great.
Why did you move?
We have, longtime residents in this neighborhood, so we have text groups. So we keep a good eye on everything.
Boulevard Park in the heart of Midtown Sacramento is the backdrop to this story that started last summer between one homeowner.
Jim is a longtime resident of this neighborhood.
And the man now facing charges for trying to kill him.
Mark was, all we knew, homeless.
Is that so?
Hey,
so you're telling me there's more to the story.
I've got a spare bedroom. You're on the street injecting meth into your veins. Why don't you come stay with me for a while?
Well, just wait until they let him out of jail and they tell him to go home. Where do you think he's going to show up?
Amy Lopez lives here too, speaking with us after her neighbor, Jim, was attacked in his own home. The suspect in that attack, Mark Reese.
Mark started taking really good care of the place. Eventually, he kind of wormed his way into the house, could maybe gain more and more trust.
Lopez says they started.
What is this relationship? What happened here?
I do not know, but I guarantee you there's more to that, too.
Did this man do something to the homeowner's rose bushes that made them extra fertile?
That's a possibility.
Lopez says they started to see Jim less and Mark more. Worry turned to genuine concern after her last conversation with Mark.
He was dressed up in fancy clothes all of a sudden. He had a fedora on. He lost all this weight.
What is happening with this story?
Oh. At what point do you assume that your neighbor, the actual homeowner, is buried underneath the walls?
He's wearing his clothes and his fedora. He didn't come in with the fedora.
He looked weird.
You don't say.
Yeah, well, he's dressed like he's ready to go to a nightclub in Detroit in 1978.
He looked weird.
Let me just save that real quick because we're going to need it for the future. He looked weird. I mean, and if you're getting skinny that quick, I think now that he didn't have to worry about the roof over his head, he had more money for methies.
They call that disposable income.
Fancy clothes all of a sudden. He had a fedora on. He lost all this weight. He looked weird.
Yeah, well, wouldn't you lose weight at that point, too? For the first time in the man's life, he suddenly has a reason to live.
And I just got this weird feeling that something was up there.
Lopez called Sacramento police for a welfare check on Sunday. Officers reported that all was okay until late that night.
Oh, so I guess all wasn't okay.
Took a turn for the worse, you don't say.
Until late that night. Police say Mark stabbed Jim multiple times in his home.
Now, was the stabbing a result of Mr. Homeless Mark asking Mr. Homeowner Jim, did you call the cops on us?
Well, maybe it was a dispute over etiquette. Maybe he wore the fedora inside and was told that Emily Post says you're not supposed to do that.
Arresting him for attempted murder. Lopez is sharing the story, she says, as a reminder to check up on your neighbors.
It's scary because you don't.
She wants credit for being the busybody.
No, that's not the moral of the story, lady. The moral of the story is don't take in the homeless.
It's not that she should get credit for calling the cops on them 24 hours before he got stabbed.
She thinks that what you should learn from this is after you take in a homeless person and they stab you, to be a busybody and call the cops so they find the person who got stabbed and not, oh, I don't know, try to put yourself in a position where you don't get stabbed.
Lopez is sharing the story, she says, as a reminder to check up on your neighbors.
It's scary because you don't want to be like, Mrs. Kravitz, always look.
You are. How much of this person's life, and not the person that got stabbed, not the homeless person, but the person who went public for this story, which is the neighbor, how much of her day is occupied on Nextdoor?
Oh, all day. All day. And if you were to meet this woman at a dinner party, the first thing she would tell you is how she saved her neighbor's life.
I think she opens and closes with that story.
She could become a vegetarian And still, the first thing she would tell you is that she saved her neighbor's life.
Mrs. Kravitz, always looking out at everybody, but I really did have a gut feeling that something was wrong.
Mark Reese, the suspect, has a lengthy criminal history going back to the 90s as recent.
How about the neighborhood protesting that Jim, the guy that got stabbed, brought this guy in to live with him?
I'm not one to blame the victim, but he did bring a dangerous person into the neighborhood. I'm not one of these people that would be wringing my hands over, what was the name of the guy that got stabbed?
Jim
getting stabbed. I wouldn't bake him a casserole. I wouldn't bake him cookies. I wouldn't bring him flowers. I wouldn't be wishing him dead, but I wouldn't be happy with him. Let's just put it that way.
Mark Reese, the suspect, has a lengthy criminal history going back to the 90s as recent as last year. In one of those cases, he was mandated to enroll in a domestic violence and battery prevention class.
This is why when you're typically a landlord or even renting out a room, you do a background check on somebody.
Oh, yeah, but you let a homeless person move into your house. It's the honor system.
Neighbors, though, relieved that he is in jail and Jim has survived, and it's why they spoke to us again to share that message.
I also love that the homeowner didn't want to be anywhere a part of this story. The reason it's on the news is because the neighbor wanted everyone to know.
If you're the homeowner, don't you move before this guy gets out?
You have to.
And potentially save lives. They're just kind of in the group chats today talking about how that call likely led to...
Okay, so 8 a.m. to 9 a.m., that's next door. 9 a.m. to 10 a.m., she's on the Ring app on those chats. 10 a.m. to 11 a.m., she's in on all her neighborhood Facebook groups. This woman's got a full day of busybodying.
Yeah, no kidding. And poor Jim, he's got to recover from his stab wounds. He's got a lot on his plate. He's got to, I'm sure, take his meds, and he's got to find a missus. He's got to go out and get a spouse. That's more important now for him than ever before, Randy. You know why?
Why's that?
Because as soon as this guy gets out, Jim's going to have to learn how to sleep in shifts.
That call likely led to, more quickly response.
Right. And like what she said, she had a gut check and said something's just not right.
Right. Yeah. So then you want to be Kravitz, right? That Mrs.
Sure.
Kravitz in the Bewitched program, you want
to
be...
please, don't even pretend like this woman is Nostradamus. That the neighbor next door took in a homeless guy who started wearing his clothes that included a fedora. The neighbor disappeared, and she has some kind of superpower.
Program, you want to be the one that's calling.
Yeah, I don't think she's changed that anytime soon. I think they're going to stick with what they've got because they're looking...
Okay. While the reporter was there interviewing the neighbor, how many other things about the neighborhood did she try to pitch her?
Oh, I'm sure all of them.
You don't understand. This guy doesn't have a barrier around his pool.
I could tell you this. I have no supernatural powers, and I would have been able to figure out that the neighbor got stabbed long before she did. The only difference is I wouldn't have called the cops.
Because they're looking out for each other.
Hopefully he'll recover.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. Madison, thank you.
Got a little shang there at the end.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. Madison, thank you.
If you'd like to email the show, you can do so at johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. That's johnnydon'tlikeshow@gmail.com. And Randy, you're monitoring the mailbag.
Jason writes in, who's listening online in Kansas, another stabby California story. What? John and Randy, I grew up in the 80s in Kansas, and even back then, we knew about stranger danger. Apparently, that wasn't taught in Cali back then, or ever. Looking forward to another week of insane crime stories. Keep it crazy, Cali. Jason from Kansas.
Well, I obviously can't predict the future, but I don't think Jason's going to be disappointed.
It's a lot of stabby stories lately.
Yeah, no kidding.